Alhamdulillah, I've now arrived in the beautiful city of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. And I thought, you know what, as a traveler myself, I'm going to make a video on the rulings of shortening and combining your prayers whilst you're traveling, because I'm not going to lie, there is a lot of misconceptions when it comes to this topic, and there's a lot of confusion regarding it as well. So inshallah, this will clarify everything for you in a short but concise video. Let's get started. The scholars have mentioned that if you guys plan on traveling and the minimum distance between you and your final destination is 48 miles, which is 77 kilometers, then you are eligible as someone that can shorten your prayers. Now pause for a second. We're going to split the rulings to do with shortening the prayers and combining the prayers so that we bring everything together in a very organized fashion so that you guys don't get confused. Now we're mentioning the things that allow you to shorten your prayers or not shorten your prayers, okay? And the first thing that we've mentioned is that you travel a minimum of 48 kilometers or miles even, which is 77 kilometers. طيب. If you're someone who wants to shorten your prayers whilst you're at your final destination, you must stay in that final destination for less than 4 full days. So, the scholars have said that if you arrive at some point after Fajr into your destination, then that day can be cancelled. You don't need to count it. From the next day, once a full day passes until that Fajr of the next day, that's 1 full day. And if a second day passes, and a third day passes, and half a fourth day passes before Fajr reaches on the 4th day, then you can shorten all your prayers from the duration that you get there until the day that you leave. But the minute that the 4th day completes, which is Fajr time on the 4th day, you cannot shorten any prayers even from day 1. This is a huge misconception. Many people think that, oh, I can shorten my prayers for the first 4 days and then after that I go back to praying as normal. That's incorrect. You must start praying as normal from day 1 if you plan on staying at this final destination for longer than 4 full days. There are 2 exceptions to what I've just said. If you do plan on going somewhere for less than 4 days, but that place is your home country, so you're coming back from travels back to your home country for less than 3 days before flying back out, you can't shorten your prayers because it's your home country. That's the first exception. The second exception is if you're going to a foreign country but you're going to your wife. If you go to that country and it's your wife that you're going to, then you cannot shorten your prayers either. And the reasoning that the scholars have given is profound, and they've said that that's because your wife is your home as well, right? And just like you can't shorten your prayers in your home, since your wife is like your home, even if you're in a foreign country, you cannot shorten your prayers even if you stay for less than 4 days. طيب, what if you plan on staying for less than 4 days, but you get there and there's mad delays? For example, your flight gets cancelled or something happens where you're delayed and you have to stay there multiple more days. What do you do in that case? In that case, you can shorten all the prayers that you have until you go back to your home country, until that delay is over. That's not a problem. Because you planned to stay less than 4 days, but because you were delayed because of something that is out of your hands, that's perfectly fine. For the entire duration of your delay, you can actually shorten your prayers during that. Now, what does it mean when we say that you can shorten your prayers? When we say that you can shorten your prayers, it means that the prayers which have 4 units, so Dhuhr, Asr and Isha, these prayers, you can pray them as 2 units instead of 4 units. That's what we mean when we say qasr, which means shortening the prayers, okay? So all of these situations that I've given, you can pray these prayers as 2 units instead of 4. So now that we've completed all the rulings with regards to shortening the prayers, now we can move on to the rulings which are separate regarding combining the prayers, because this is where the confusion happens, when there's no separation between the 2. In the first half, we spoke about what allows you to shorten your prayers. So that means that when it's Dhuhr time, you can shorten. When it's Asr time, you can shorten. When it's Isha time, you can shorten. But now we're going to talk about the specific situations where you can combine the prayers, whether you can shorten them or not. And I will make that distinction for you, okay? And this is where things will become clear, inshallah ta'ala. طيب. If you guys plan on leaving to travel during Dhuhr time, so Dhuhr has already started, okay? But you arrive after Asr finishes, then you combine Dhuhr and Asr before you leave, but you do not shorten. So you pray 4 and 4, then you go on your travels, and that's perfectly fine, okay? This is scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 is if you leave before Dhuhr begins, but you arrive before Asr finishes, okay? In that situation, you wait until you arrive at your destination, and then you shorten and combine 2 and 2 for Dhuhr and Asr if you stay less than 4 days. Scenario 3 is if you leave before Dhuhr starts and you arrive after Asr finishes, so you miss both the prayers essentially. This is scenario 3. What do you do in that case? In that case, you do something called Jama' Suri, okay? Which is basically where you combine and shorten because you're traveling, okay? But you pray Dhuhr right at the end of its time and Asr right at the beginning of its time, so that it's basically combined, but it's technically not combined because you're praying every single prayer in its original time. If you're not able to do that, then you can pray 2 during Dhuhr time when you're traveling, and then 2 during Asr when you're traveling. A lot of people make the mistake of combining Dhuhr and Asr during Dhuhr time, or Dhuhr and Asr during Asr time, you see? So what you can do is what I've mentioned if you want to combine, otherwise pray them separately in their distinct times whilst you're traveling. That's scenario 3. Scenario 4 is if you leave after Dhuhr starts, but you arrive before Asr finishes. In that case, you pray 4 before you leave for Dhuhr, and then 2 after you arrive, if you're staying for less than 4 days, for Asr, inshallah ta'ala, okay? Everything I've mentioned for Dhuhr and Asr applies for Maghrib and Isha, where Maghrib replicates Dhuhr and Isha replicates Asr. Fajr is by itself, and the same applies if you leave before it starts or after it finishes, etc. That also applies for Fajr. So hopefully that should make complete sense to you, and bi'idhnillah ta'ala, you should have a good understanding on what to do if you're traveling. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.